The Galactic Empire had flourished for over 2,000 years, a monumental entity whose influence stretched across countless star systems. It was an era of unparalleled peace, governed by a complex system of alliances and treaties that allowed various species to coexist without major conflict. This tranquility had become the fabric of the galaxy, woven through the lives of millions who had known no other way. Generations had grown up under its banner, believing that peace was an unbreakable constant, a law of nature itself. For many, the Empire's reign was not just a political entity, it was an emblem of order, a stabilizing force that had eliminated the chaos of ancient times. The human race had once been a young, expanding species, barely an afterthought on the galactic stage. But over time, they had proven themselves resilient, adaptable, and capable of great feats. Though never at the forefront of power, humanity had earned its place within the Empire. The humans had contributed to the arts, sciences, and even military endeavors, but they had always remained loyal to the Empire's ideal of peace. Humanity's leaders had long understood the importance of maintaining harmony in the galaxy, often acting as mediators between warring factions. The cost of any conflict was too great to bear, and so, humanity respected the status quo. But everything changed when the Empire, once the very foundation of this peace, made a fateful decision that shattered centuries of stability. A covert operation was launched, an attack on a human colony that had always remained neutral in galactic affairs. The colony was far from the seat of the Empire's power, situated on the fringe of Imperial-controlled space. It had been a place of refuge for settlers, untouched by the greed of the galaxy's more powerful factions. The Empire's motives were unclear to those who had no knowledge of the secretive decision-making happening in the highest echelons of power. Was it for resources? Was it a calculated move to assert dominance over the human race? Or was it something more sinister? The attack was swift and brutal. The once serene colony became the stage for an unprovoked assault. Ships from the Empire's fleet descended on the settlement, overwhelming the planet's meager defenses with ease. Civilians, workers, and soldiers alike found themselves caught in the crossfire, unable to mount an effective resistance. The silence of the galaxy's peace was shattered by the thunderous blasts of warships and the cries of innocent lives being extinguished. The attack was not just a military operation, it was a message, a statement to all who lived under the Empire's rule. Peace was no longer a guarantee. Humanity had been betrayed, and it was a betrayal that cut deep into the hearts of every man, woman, and child who called themselves a part of the human race. The Empire had broken a contract, a trust that had been held for over 2 millennia. The human colonies had always honored their agreements with the Empire, had never stirred the pot of conflict, and had been loyal to the peace they had fought to maintain. But now, their very existence was threatened by an attack that was not just unjust, but cruel. What was once a shining example of unity had turned into a cold and calculating machine, willing to sacrifice lives for the sake of control. The reaction from humanity was swift, but it was not immediate. For a brief moment, there was shock, disbelief. The thought that the Empire, the very symbol of order, could be the one to break the peace was incomprehensible. Leaders, military commanders, and citizens alike were caught off guard by the betrayal. Some sought to understand the reasoning behind the attack, hoping it was a mistake or misunderstanding, but soon the truth became clear. This was no accident. This was deliberate. As the reality of the situation sank in, something far more powerful than mere anger began to stir within the hearts of the people. It was rage, a burning, unrelenting fire that swept across human society. People who had always lived in the shadow of the Empire's peace now began to see the galaxy in a different light. They realized that the peace they had come to rely on was fragile, and that their survival was not guaranteed. The attack on the colony had been a spark, and it ignited something far greater than a simple military response. It awakened a deep, primal instinct within humanity, an instinct to fight, to resist, and to reclaim what had been taken from them. The Empire's actions had not only broken the peace, they had given birth to a new force in the galaxy. Humanity, long underestimated by the other species of the galaxy, now found themselves standing on the precipice of a new chapter in their history. The Empire had assumed that their power would go unchallenged, that their will could not be contested. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: humanity would not be cowed. It would not bend to their will. And it would not forgive the slaughter of its people. The general, a veteran of many campaigns, had always believed in peace. He had been a mediator, a diplomat. He had served the Empire with honor, his loyalty to the peace agreement unquestionable. But now, standing amidst the ruins of a once thriving colony, his worldview shattered. He had lost friends, colleagues, and comrades in the attack. People he had known for years, people who had trusted him to protect them. The Empire had not only attacked his people, it had attacked his very sense of duty and honor. This was not just a military conflict. This was personal. He knew what he had to do. He could no longer stand by and watch as his people were slaughtered. His mind was clear, his resolve stronger than ever. This was no longer about diplomacy or peace. This was about vengeance. This was about ensuring that humanity would not be forgotten, that it would no longer be seen as a weak, inconsequential species in the eyes of the galaxy. The Empire had made a grave mistake, and the time for retaliation was at hand. As he prepared for war, his anger was tempered by a singular thought: humanity would rise. They would show the galaxy that, when pushed to the brink, they would fight back with everything they had. The general was not just a leader of men. He was a symbol of the rage that burned in every human heart. And that rage would be their weapon. The Empire had broken the peace. Now humanity would break their chains. The general had always been a man of peace. Throughout his career, he had avoided unnecessary conflict, working diligently behind the scenes to preserve the fragile alliances that held the galaxy together. He had seen war firsthand, its horrors, its destruction, but had always believed that diplomacy and strategy could resolve even the most bitter of disputes. He had been trusted by his peers, respected by his subordinates, and admired by the civilians who had never known a life outside the Empire's protective grasp. But all of that had changed the day the Empire launched its unprovoked assault on the human colony. The attack was not only an affront to the peace he had worked to maintain, but a personal betrayal. The colony had been under his protection. His military experience, his dedication to keeping peace, had led him to form strong bonds with the people there. It was a place he had visited often, a place that had felt like a second home. To see it destroyed, its people slaughtered, was more than he could bear. This was not just a breach of protocol, it was an attack on his very core. The anger that began to boil within him was unlike anything he had ever felt. For years, he had followed orders without question, believing that the Empire's peace was something worth upholding. But now that peace felt like a lie. How could the Empire, the very institution he had devoted his life to, commit such an atrocity? How could they justify the senseless destruction of innocent lives? The betrayal wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. The Empire had crossed a line, and there would be no going back. As he stood at the heart of his command center, the weight of leadership settled heavily upon him. He could feel the stares of his officers, their expectations of him. They had followed him for years, trusting his judgment and his commitment to peace. But now they were looking to him for a different kind of leadership. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for vengeance had come. He knew that any hesitation would be seen as weakness. This was a moment that demanded action, and he was ready to answer the call. The general had never been a man driven by hatred. But this was different. This was the loss of something far greater than a colony. It was the loss of his sense of self. His belief in the system he had sworn to protect was shattered. And with that destruction came a singular, focused purpose: to strike back. The Empire had made a grave mistake, and now humanity would make them pay. He gathered his most trusted officers, outlining a plan that would take the fight to the Empire's doorstep. No longer would humans remain silent in the face of oppression. No longer would they bend the knee to an empire that viewed them as expendable. They would make their stand, not just for the survivors of the colony, but for every human across the galaxy who had been made to feel small, insignificant and powerless. As he prepared his forces, he reflected on humanity's place in the galaxy. For too long, humans had been seen as the underdogs, capable, but not powerful enough to challenge the larger, more established powers. The Empire had long assumed that they could control humanity with ease, that their might was unquestionable. They had underestimated the one thing that made humans dangerous: their refusal to be broken. Humanity's strength wasn't in numbers or advanced technology. It was in their spirit, their will to survive against all odds. The Empire had made a fatal miscalculation, and now they would learn the consequences. The general had witnessed countless battles, but none had ever felt as personal as this. The anger in his chest fueled his every decision. He wasn't just leading a military campaign, he was leading a revolution. The fight for survival had become a fight for pride, for identity. He had been trained to be a soldier, but this was different. He wasn't just commanding troops, he was fighting for something much larger: the soul of humanity itself. His rage had become a weapon, driving him forward with a clarity he had never known before. He didn't need to explain it to anyone. His officers, his soldiers understood. They, too, had felt the sting of betrayal. They, too, had lost friends, family, and comrades. They had lived under the shadow of the Empire's dominance for far too long. And now, it was their turn to rise. As the fleet prepared for launch, the general's mind was sharp, focused on the task ahead. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The Empire would not back down easily, but neither would humanity. The galaxy had underestimated them for far too long, and now they would see the true power of a species that had been pushed too far. The general would not allow humanity to be the Empire's punching bag. The first strike was brutal and decisive. The Empire would learn that humanity was no longer the weak link in their system. The general knew that this was only the beginning, that there would be losses along the way. But the rage burning inside him was a force that could not be ignored. The war had begun, and with it, humanity's place in the galaxy had irrevocably changed. They would no longer sit on the sidelines. They would fight, and they would win. For the general, this was no longer just a military operation. This was a crusade, a fight for dignity, for respect, for a future where humanity was no longer viewed as insignificant. The Empire had made a mistake. They had assumed that they could break the peace without consequences. But they had underestimated the one thing that could never be defeated: human resolve. Humanity's response was swift and brutal, a calculated rage that spread through every corner of the human colonies. No longer was there the hesitation of a species unwilling to take action. Now, there was only a singular purpose: to make the Empire regret underestimating them. The general, leading this charge, knew that this war would not be fought like others. The Empire was vast, its resources immense, but humanity had something far more dangerous: determination. The first battle was a defining moment, one that would echo throughout the galaxy. The general had carefully devised a plan, using every scrap of human ingenuity. The Empire was technologically superior, but the general knew their reliance on sheer firepower would be their undoing. Humanity's strength lay in their ability to think on their feet, to adapt, to improvise when it seemed impossible. Every strike they made was calculated, each move designed to cripple the Empire's infrastructure without overextending their forces. The first wave was designed to hit fast and hard, destabilizing key supply lines, cutting off reinforcements, and sowing confusion within the Empire's ranks. Despite the Empire's might, humanity's guerrilla tactics quickly proved effective. Human ships, smaller and more agile, darted between asteroid fields and debris, avoiding the larger Imperial warships. They used the vastness of space as their ally, always staying one step ahead, using the terrain to their advantage. The Empire's fleets were powerful, but they were slow to adapt to these unconventional tactics. The general's fleet, though smaller, had the advantage of unpredictability. Their hit-and-run strikes were relentless, leaving the Empire scrambling to respond. The general had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The Empire had vast resources and a long history of dominance. They would not crumble easily. But each victory, Each small triumph sent a message across the galaxy. Humanity would not be crushed. They had taken a blow, but now they were striking back with everything they had. The general understood that the fight ahead would be long, and the casualties would mount. But the fire of rage burned within his soldiers, and that fire could not be extinguished. Every soldier under his command understood what was at stake. This was not just a battle for survival, it was a battle for respect, for the very future of humanity. As the battles raged on, the general's strategy shifted. He knew the Empire would eventually learn from their mistakes, that they would begin to anticipate the tactics humanity was using. So, he adapted, using misdirection, feints, and unexpected alliances with fringe groups who shared humanity's hatred for the Empire. These moves were dangerous and risky, but the general knew that they were necessary. The Empire had grown complacent in its power, and now it was scrambling to adjust to a foe it had never expected. Humanity, once considered weak and inconsequential, was proving that they could wage war on their own terms. The tide of battle was not always in their favor. The Empire struck back with devastating force, and for every victory humanity won, they suffered losses. But the resilience of the human spirit kept them fighting. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they refused to yield. Each loss was a wound, but each wound only fueled their resolve. The general could feel the collective rage of his people driving them forward, and it pushed him to lead with unflinching determination. There were no easy choices, no guarantees of victory, but there was something more powerful than any fleet of ships or army of soldiers: humanity's unyielding will to survive. The general's leadership, once defined by peace and diplomacy, now reflected the ferocity of a man unwilling to allow his people to be wiped out. His anger was no longer just a personal feeling, it had become a rallying cry for his forces. His soldiers, once hesitant, now fought with a purpose they had never known. The general was no longer just a leader, he was a symbol of the rage that burned in every human heart. His tactics were becoming more brutal, less concerned with preserving the lives of his troops, and more focused on sending a message to the Empire. They had attacked his people, his family, and now it was time for retribution. The Empire's forces began to crumble under the pressure. Their confidence was shattered, their tactics in disarray. The once immense power of the Empire was beginning to show cracks. Humanity's relentless assault had forced them to fight on multiple fronts, stretching their resources thin. The general knew that they could not sustain this pace forever, but each victory took the Empire one step closer to breaking. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were paying the price. The general's mind was sharp, every move he made calculated, each victory another nail in the Empire's coffin. As the war dragged on, the general's reputation grew. To the human colonies, he became a hero, a symbol of defiance. To the Empire, he became a threat that could not be ignored. The Empire's leaders were forced to recognize the toll that humanity's resistance was taking, and as they watched their fleets falter, they began to understand that this was not a rebellion. They were facing a species that had awoken from the complacency of peace and would not be silenced. Each victory brought them closer to the heart of the Empire, but the general knew the final battle would be the hardest. It would not be won with tactics alone, it would require everything humanity had. But with each strike, with each loss, the fire in his soldiers burned hotter. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future, for their right to exist without the shadow of the Empire looming over them. The Empire had broken the peace, but now humanity was reclaiming it. The war was far from over, but there was no turning back. The general's resolve, the rage of his people, and their determination to never be subjugated again had turned the tide. The Empire was not just facing a rebellion, they were facing a force they could no longer ignore. And humanity would fight until the last breath to prove their place in the galaxy. The final confrontation was inevitable. After countless skirmishes, ambushes, and relentless guerrilla warfare, humanity had reached the point of no return. The Empire had underestimated them, thought their resilience was a mere flash in the pan. But now, the Empire was on the defensive. The general, who had once stood as a diplomat, now stood as the leader of a revolution, ready to face the full wrath of the Empire's remaining forces. The galaxy had become a battlefield, and humanity's rage had made it clear that the cost of their mistakes would be paid in full. The Empire's military might, once an unstoppable force, was stretched thin. The human resistance had hit them where it hurt, crippling their logistics, targeting their key military installations, and forcing them to spread their forces across multiple fronts. They had tried to regain control, but every time they sent reinforcements, humanity adapted, growing bolder with each victory. The general knew that time was running out for the Empire. Their complacency had cost them dearly, and now their survival depended on defeating humanity's unrelenting onslaught. Humanity had discovered something vital during this campaign. Their true power wasn't in their technology, though it had been upgraded significantly during the war. It wasn't in their numbers, either, for they still lacked the sheer size of the Empire's war machines. No, humanity's true strength was in their refusal to accept defeat. Every setback they faced was met with renewed determination. The general saw it in his soldiers' eyes. They weren't fighting for personal glory, or even for survival. They were fighting for something more important: their dignity. The galaxy had treated them as second-class citizens for far too long. The Empire had tried to break them. Now, they would show the galaxy that humans could never be broken. The final strike came when the general orchestrated an assault on the Empire's capital fleet, a formidable force, but one that was already weakened by the ongoing conflict. His strategy was audacious, even reckless, but it was the kind of move that could either end the war or destroy everything humanity had fought for. The Empire's capital fleet was the nerve center of their entire military operation. Without it, their coordinated efforts would crumble. The general knew that taking down this fleet would deliver a crushing blow to the Empire's command structure. But it would also come at a great cost. Many of his own forces would not return. Still, the general did not hesitate. This was a gamble that had to be made. The battle was chaos, a collision of desperate forces clashing in the heart of the Empire's remaining stronghold. The human fleet, though smaller in number, fought with unmatched ferocity. They had something the Empire had lost: a singular purpose. The general led the charge, not as a commander giving orders from a distance, but as a warrior, sharing in the struggle of his troops. His fleet was outgunned, outnumbered, and surrounded. Yet they fought on, driven by the knowledge that victory was their only option. For humanity, surrender was not a choice. As the battle raged on, the general's tactics evolved. He used decoys, misdirection, and surprise attacks, outsmarting the Empire at every turn. They were no longer just fighting against the Empire's superior firepower. They were fighting against the complacency that had caused the Empire to underestimate them in the first place. Humanity's advantage lay in their creativity and their tenacity. The Empire's fleet, once seen as an unbeatable force, was beginning to break apart. The general's forces, though battered, continued their relentless assault. In the final moments of the battle, as the Empire's capital fleet began to crumble, the general faced a moment of clarity. The Empire had underestimated humanity's ability to wage war, and now they were witnessing the consequences. But even more than that, they were witnessing something the Empire could never understand: the power of a people who had been pushed to the edge, only to rise up with a fury that could not be contained. Humanity had taken everything the Empire could throw at them, and yet they had not only survived, they had thrived. As the last of the Empire's ships were destroyed, the general knew that the war was over. The Empire's once unbreakable grasp on the galaxy had been shattered. The general stood on the precipice of victory, knowing that his people had not just fought for survival, they had fought for the future. The Empire had sought to erase them, to break them, but instead, humanity had broken the Empire. They had proven to the galaxy that they would never be subjugated again. Victory came with its price. The general stood amidst the wreckage, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen soldiers. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. The price of peace was high, but the cost of complacency was higher. The galaxy would remember this moment as the turning point in history. The Empire had been the oppressor, but humanity had become the liberators. And in the aftermath of the war, there was a new understanding, one that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had made its mark, not just as survivors, but as warriors who would never again be underestimated. They had shown the galaxy the true meaning of defiance. The Empire may have broken the peace, but humanity had broken their chains. The galaxy would no longer belong to the complacent rulers who had taken them for granted. Humanity's place in the stars had been earned, and no one would ever again question their resolve.